Well, welcome everyone, both physically here and those online, to the 36th Edinburgh Medal ceremony for 22 being held in the city chambers of the City of Edinburgh Council. The appalling horror of the wars in Ukraine, Syria, Yemen and Myanmar have understandably obscured the continuing assault on biodiversity. But we need to act upon this just as urgently. And that urgency was demonstrated recently in the National Museum of Scotland, where the extinction bell rang at random intervals 150 to 200 times every day, with each ring representing the extinction of one species. And one of the causes of the destruction of biodiversity is the climate emergency. And that was addressed less successfully than many had hoped at COP26 in Glasgow just last year. But the crisis of biodiversity will be centre stage at COP15 taking place in Kunming, China, later this year. So we meet here tonight between two world conferences, the outcomes of which will determine all our futures. Now, the advantage of concentrating on one aspect at a time is well known, but separating critical issues can often lead to a lack of recognition of what is common to them, often described as silo thinking. And one obvious link between the silos is the unceasing drive for greater growth and profit to the exclusion of all other issues. Another is that we look at and act upon the world as though it was separate from ourselves, when in fact, we ourselves are nature, just another intimate part of the environment. An environment that we have created, there being not a part of the world that has not been altered by human activity. Now, if our actions are the causes of these crises, then we must be part of the solution. And this is a third problem of silos, that tackling these urgent problems when it is not delayed, is addressed with little concern for people. Of course, it's carried out in the name of humanity, but that abstraction begs the question, for which people, by which people, for whose benefit? And these are not questions for elsewhere in the world. Here in Scotland, we find great tracts of our land being bought and sold internationally by ultra-rich individuals and commercial companies. They claim to be solving the climate emergency by planting trees, but the solution to the climate emergency is for those people and companies to urgently reduce their production of carbon dioxide. In the meantime, these actions in the name of humanity are carried out over the heads of the people of Scotland, regardless of their concerns and their needs. In this local context, the pioneering work of Dr. Gladys Kalema-Zikusoka has a special resonance. But its wider message is critical to the outcome of COP15, that the protection and restoration of biodiversity needs to be carried out with and for the people for the benefit of every part of our environment. I would now like to call upon Francesca Ozowska, Chief Executive of Nature Scot, to deliver tonight's oration. Francesca.
Thank you very much, Lord Provost. You have stolen a lot of my lines. It's lovely to be here tonight. Many thanks to the City of Edinburgh Council and the Edinburgh Science Festival for this invitation to provide the oration. I really do feel greatly privileged. Esteemed guests, it is a deep honour for me to help make this award in celebration of the achievements of Dr. Gladys Kalema-Zikusoka. Dr. Kalema-Zikusoka is an outstanding Ugandan veterinarian and founder and CEO of Conservation Through Public Health. This organisation is dedicated to the coexistence of endangered mountain gorillas, other wildlife, humans and livestock in Africa. Gladys was Uganda's first wildlife veterinary officer and starred in the BBC documentary, Gladys the African Vet. In 2009, she won the Whitley Gold Award for her conservation work, and in December 2021, Dr. Kalema-Zikusoka was proclaimed a United Nations Environment Programme's Champion of the Earth for Science and Innovation for her work with the One Health Institute. Celebrating this at a time when we face seemingly unsurmountable global challenges on so many fronts is surely a moment to treasure. Indeed, it is because of the troubles we face that this celebration is all the more important. Let me say something of those challenges of which I'm sure Dr. Kalema-Zikusoka and you all will be well aware. Nature is in crisis. Biodiversity, the sum of all life on Earth, is suffering devastating decline. A global catastrophe threatens humanity. Scotland is not immune from this. Those lovely images that we see in tourism brochures of Scotland's landscape silhouetted against the setting sun are not to be wholly celebrated. Those pictures of stags standing majestically in the heather-clad hills without a tree in sight should not be the norm. The lonely Scots pine is not heroic. Glistening seas depleted of former glories are compellingly sad. These are stark images of Scotland's declining nature, which have endured decades, if not centuries, of intensive overuse. We have to, and indeed are, setting about restoring nature in Scotland, bending the curve of decline to revive and rejuvenate wildlife. We must look to nature champions to inspire us. We need nature restored, with people at the heart of an inspiring transformation. Wildlife and humans interconnected and coexisting. And above all, we need nature valued by everyone, of value to everyone, and championed by us all. The awful global COVID pandemic has highlighted the potential for disease passed from wild animal to human to wreak devastating consequences. The likelihood increases as we destroy natural habitats. But the risk goes the other way too. The potential for people to pass diseases to wild animals also has consequences. And that, dear friends, leads me to this remarkable lady. This zoonotic link is at the heart of groundbreaking research in the 1990s by Dr. Kalema-Zikusoka. And like all pioneering research, it has triggered an effective response. It started with a question. What was the source of a bout of scabies amongst a group of Ugandan mountain gorillas, an outbreak that led to the death of an infant? Leading a team in 1996, Dr. Kalema-Zikusoka found that these windy gorillas had been foraging for food close to human settlements. A post-mortem of a young gorilla identified scabies as the cause. Further research identified scabies in humans as the source. The brilliant insight from Dr. Kalema-Zikusoka, in her own words, is that it was clear that in these fragile areas where wildlife, people, and livestock intersect, a decline in any of them affects the survival of the others. And I'll repeat, a decline in any of them affects the survival of the others. Something had to be done. In 2003, Dr. Kalema-Zikusoka, along with Lawrence Zikusoka and Stephen Rubanga, established the charity Conservation Through Public Health. This pioneering organization works to improve both human and ecological health in Africa. It is a non-profit organization based in Uganda and the USA that conducts programs to protect gorillas and other wildlife from human and livestock disease risk. The work reduces human and livestock diseases in the vicinity of wildlife, increases the local use of family planning, and uses information and communication technology to help both local development and to educate people about the environment. The work Dr. Kalema-Zikusoka leads is not just about improving the lot of the mountain gorilla, as important as that is. It is also about improving people's lives. By improving hygiene, health improves. Further, there is a growing appreciation of the value of the mountain gorilla. As a result, tourism centred on gorillas supports otherwise hard-pressed communities. These are brilliant achievements. I could continue in this vein, and it would take quite some time to list the accolades, awards, and high-profile acknowledgements that Dr. Kalema-Zikusoka has garnered since the early years of this century. The Edinburgh Medal does not necessarily cap them all, and I'm sure it will not be the last accolade. But it is a uniquely special and heartfelt recognition of outstanding endeavour. Here we celebrate the accomplishments of a truly remarkable woman, someone who is making a real difference and inspiring many to take the nature crisis head on and offer solutions. As the Lord Provost said, the timing of this award could hardly be better. We look to an international agreement to transform global nature and biodiversity at COP15 in China later this year. This agreement, every bit as important as the agreement on climate change, will frame our efforts to restore nature around the world. Scotland played a key role in hosting the climate COP in Glasgow last year and has every intention of leading the way in tackling the nature crisis. Right now, we look around the world through anxious eyes. We are desperate to act to make a difference. Well, I say this, we can act. In the face of apparently unstoppable global events and trends, some very special people can make a difference and inspire us. Dr. Gladys Kalema-Zikusoka is a shining exemplar, and we salute and thank you. I, for one, am really looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Francesca, for that fantastic oration. And now on to the medal ceremony itself. The Edinburgh Medal has been instituted by the City of Edinburgh Council to honour men and women of science and technology who have made a significant contribution to the understanding and well-being of humanity. The Edinburgh Medal for 2022 is awarded to Gladys Kalema-Zikusoka in recognition of the development of her science for the conservation of humans and other animals through practical engagement with and involvement of communities. This approach being essential for the protection of biodiversity and for the benefit of all life. Dr. Kalema-Zikusoka, it gives me great pleasure to award you the Edinburgh Medal 2022. Dr. Kalema-Zikusoka, can I now ask you to deliver your Edinburgh Medal address?
Good evening, everybody. I'm extremely honored and humbled to receive the Edinburgh Medal. When I received the letter from Ian Wall, I was very, very, very impressed. I couldn't believe it, and I couldn't believe that I could have been selected for that, especially when I read the people who have received the medal before. Thank you so much for appreciating my work, and thank you all for coming today. I have been working with mountain gorillas for a long time. Some people here have known me since before I was born, and then when I was born. And yeah, it's been a very interesting journey. I'm glad that through it we've seen the numbers of mountain gorillas growing, and I'm going to talk about the One Health approach that we've been implementing for some time, which I think has really had great benefits for the wildlife and the communities who share their fragile habitats. I'm going to start by telling you my parents came here in the 50s. They studied at Edinburgh University. That time Uganda was still a colony of Great Britain, and they used to sponsor people to come and study, and their wives used to come along. So that's my mom and dad over there at the graduation at my Kewan Hall. And my mom was seeing my dad off at the station. Actually, the Carters are here today, and yesterday we talked about where that could be, and they actually identified the place. My mom couldn't remember the road, but they identified the place, because that's how Edinburgh used to look in those days. Of course, now it's much smarter. I was seeing him off. And then my dad came earlier, and in there is my mom's brother, and I'm glad Janet Chiwana is here. Father is in that photo. The fourth bridge with two other Ugandans. And then over there, my dad headed the African Student Union in Edinburgh University. And actually an interesting relationship came out of that, because they were, in 1956, I think, is when Mandela was first arrested. And so my dad knocked on the door of some people who became our guardians, the Kloppers. They had left South Africa. It was Professor Arnold Klopper and his wife Mary. They were against apartheid. He was African, she was British South African. And he said, "What can I do for you?" And she said she was so impressed, she expected my dad to say, "What can you do for us?" And that struck a friendship that has lasted very many decades. They passed on, that have been in their late 90s, I think. But through that partnership, they got to meet the Mickeys, who then met the Carters, who had lived in Uganda. And the Mickeys were famous painters in Edinburgh, David and Aileen Mickey. And that I got to meet all those people when I was here. And just to show that, you know, my mom also didn't just come to accompany my dad. She actually came to study as well, and she studied social work, and that's how with her friends. One of them is still alive, Beryl Knotts. And it's interesting, the hotel I'm staying at, when I looked at the address, is exactly the same place where she was. And the reason I remember that photo is she's written an autobiography which was launched. She wrote, it came out last October. She's 92 right now, and in that she has that photograph with Beryl in front of the palace. So I was very excited that I'm staying in a hotel very near there, and I told her. And that was when she was with her graduating class. Well, my dad went on to do great things. He went back to Uganda and was a member of parliament. Then he was in the first government after independence. And then the president, Obote, asked him to lead goodwill delegations. He even went to China and East Germany, USSR, India, Japan. And he did great things. Sadly, he was killed by Idi Amin in 1972. Because he was in the previous government of Obote, and Amin saw him as a threat. So he was one of the first prominent people to be killed, and that started a wave of abductions in Uganda. He was abducted, and Uganda started going downhill and has never really recovered since then. But if you can see, I'm the baby in the photo. Those were sadly one of the last days of my dad, so I don't remember him. But we've all tried our best to continue his legacy, and all my siblings came to university in the UK. When I was 12 years old, I came to Dola Academy because it was a time that Amin had just been ousted, and my parents were my mom was a little bit worried about the situation. So I came to Dola. My sister had come a couple of years earlier, and the Wambuzis, Wako, and Alice are here. Their sisters went there as well, and two other Ugandan families. And so I was in Dola for 2 years, which was very interesting for me. And I did make lasting friendships. I did make lasting friendships. I must say that when I came, our organization in February 2020, we came back here and we were very fortunate to win the St. Andrews Prize for the Environment. And one of my classmates who I met through BBC, because she was heading the BBC department, reconnected with me in 2018 when they filmed our work. And she said to me, why don't we go there? And I said, I'm about to catch my flight. So this time around, she's organized for me to speak at Dola on Friday, which will be great. I haven't been there for a long time, maybe 40 years. And then when I really got into wildlife, at the wildlife clubs, set up a wildlife club in my high school in Uganda. And it was very, very interesting experience for me. This was in 1989, 88, 89. We managed to take the children to the national park, Queen Elizabeth National Park, which was named after the Queen, shortly after she got married, actually, to the Duke of Edinburgh. Queen Elizabeth National Park was created. And when we got there, sadly, there was very little wildlife, and there were no predators, because they had all been, the animals had been poached during the Idi Amin days, and there were hardly any predators. So we could actually walk through the park. But it struck me that there's very little wildlife, and we needed to do something to help the wildlife in Uganda. And at that point, having grown up with lots of pets at home and wanting to become a vet, my siblings were much older than me, so the pets were my friends, the dogs, the cats and dogs. I always wanted to be a vet. And then after setting up the wildlife club at Chibuli Secondary School, I felt that I wanted to be a vet who also works with wildlife. And I started off, I did my vet school at the Royal Vet College, University of London, where you're allowed to work with an animal of your choice in the holidays. And I worked with chimpanzees at the zoo in Entebbe. Then I also worked with chimps in Budongo Forest under Professor Vernon Reynolds. Then I got to work with gorillas, hosted by International Gorilla Conservation Program, and Dr. Liz McPhee, who was a vet who used to work in Rwanda. And that was really a turning point in my life. That photograph, surprisingly enough, was taken when I was in Buindi, because as soon as I got to Buindi, having wanting to do this for so many years, to study the mountain gorillas, this was 1994, I couldn't visit them because I had a nasty cold. And it was so annoying. So I could actually go for a walk to the waterfall, which I did, but I had to wait for a whole week before I could go out to see the gorillas. And by the time I finally managed to see them and start collecting samples, I realized how we can very easily make them sick. Because the first gorilla I met, Kachipira, was very, very accommodating. I couldn't believe how close we could get to them without him, being very relaxed. But because they're so accommodating is why we have to be so careful. And that's something I'm going to be talking about in my presentation. The gorilla there is called Kanyonyi. He's one of my favorite gorillas. He signifies how far conservation has gone in Buindi. He was, in 96, I think is when he was born. And in 98, I operated on his older sister when she had a rectal prolapse. And Kanyonyi grew up to be a big silverback. Because he had grown up seeing people all his life, he was always used to frightening tourists when they came, just to see their reaction. He was quite a mischievous head of the group. Kanyonyi, sadly, in 2017, fell off a tree, which is rare in gorillas, and broke his hip joint and developed an infection. And in spite of treatments, he never got better. And then he fought with another silverback that wanted to take over the group. And eventually, he died. The silverback eventually took over the group. But when I posted a message on Facebook about a tribute to Kanyonyi, many people posted photos, and there was about 300 shares, because people had got so used to visiting this group and meeting Kanyonyi, but also the community was also very concerned. And this showed us how far conservation has gone in Uganda. Everybody is now very concerned about the gorillas, the community, the tourists, and that means that the gorillas have a lot of hope. They have a bright future. The mountain gorillas are found in two populations, and the Buindi population is the most recently discovered, where I've been doing most of my work. And when I first started out, there were only about 650 mountain gorillas. And now the numbers have really gone up, and that's something we're very excited about. But they're in two fragmented populations that will never meet. Because in between those two populations, there's a lot of building up in the area. It's all completely overtaken by infrastructure. So sadly, hundreds of years ago, those populations met, but now they'll never meet. And when the Lord Provost talked about the whole climate issue and Francesca, it's a big issue, but also high human population growth. All of that is something that we really need to think about in the future. Bwindi is, for those who have had an opportunity to visit, how many here have seen the mountain gorillas? One, Peter hasn't been. Two, where did you see them? Bwindi. In Bwindi, wow, fantastic. In Rwanda, great. It's something that I really encourage you all to do. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and it's really amazing. It's really amazing to visit the mountain gorillas. But when you get there, I think it's the same in Rwanda as well. You see a very hard edge. And there's a very hard edge because of a very high human population growth rate of there's about 300 people per square kilometer. And in Uganda, we have amongst the highest human population growth rates in the world of about 3.1%. And so when it became a national park in 1992, people were not allowed in anymore to cut trees or to set snares for wildlife. But the gorillas keep coming out because now they've been habituated, they've lost their fear of people, they've been habituated for tourism, and they're going back to where they used to range before people had cut up right up to the forest. And this is a very big issue. Another big issue is poaching. Luckily, in Uganda and Rwanda, people don't eat gorillas, they don't eat primates typically. Actually, the Batwa, who used to live in the forest before it became a national park, it was always bad luck to look in the eyes of a gorilla, so they used to avoid the gorillas. They kind of managed to coexist with them, but they used to set snares for other animals that they like to eat, like the daika and the bush pig. And when it became a national park, they were settled outside the park by the government, and poaching continues for other species. But in other parts of Africa, there are 9 other countries in Africa with gorillas. They're not mountain gorillas, but they're other subspecies. A lot of people believe that if you eat a gorilla, you become as strong as a gorilla. So the numbers are really going down in other places. But however, there's a new threat which came about because of habituation. From that photo, you can see we are all very closely related to the great apes. We're just another great ape, actually. And we are actually one of the most destructive great apes, unfortunately. But the chimpanzees are even more related to us, closely related than the gorillas, 98.7%. The mountain gorilla is 98.4%, and then the orangutan is about 97%. But because we're so related to each other, we can easily make each other sick. And this particular baby gorilla died of scabies. I got a call that the gorillas were losing hair and developing white scaly skin. And I went and I asked a human doctor friend of mine who had also studied in the UK, Dr. Catherine Sozi, and I asked her what is the most common skin disease in people. She said scabies. And so I went to Bwindi, which is a 10-hour drive from Kampala, with a drug to treat scabies. And because I had learned in vet school that common things occur commonly, and start with the most common disease when you're treating a patient. And it turned out that it was scabies. So we're able to treat the rest of the group with ivermectin, and they got better, but sadly the baby gorilla died before we could do anything for it. And we started to wonder where could the scabies have come from, and we discovered that it came from the people living around the park who have very little health care. Those little boys in the photograph, I took that photo when I was just entering the park to check on the gorillas, and they were actually supposed to be in school, but they were busy herding goats. And as long as you have so much poverty and people aren't going to school, you're always going to have a problem of poverty and poor hygiene. So they got it when they went to eat people's banana plants. And this particular farmer was very, very upset. And I asked him if he likes the gorillas. He said yes, because his son is employed by the park and some money from tourism is shared with the community. But someone like him whose crop is destroyed, he's not being compensated. So we later on made sure that he becomes part of the human-gorilla conflict team that herds gorillas back to the park and gets some incentives. And that's a micro-hydro dam that was put up in the park because the forest is important not only for precious wildlife like gorillas, but it's also a source of water. And the time that we started out, the electricity never used to reach Bwindi. But however, the gorillas like playing there. And we also had other cases that we have to keep dealing with, like the rectal prolapse, and we weren't sure whether it was human-related or not. And so all of this led us to feel that we have to set up an organization to set up an early warning system for disease outbreaks. So if you come and visit us in Bwindi, this is the view you will get, very nice view of my office. And inside there, you have chimpanzees, elephants, 6 species of monkeys, over 300 species of birds, butterflies, so much biodiversity. And all of it is being protected through tourism, which is amazing. And we have 3 integrated programs: wildlife conservation, community health, and alternative livelihoods. And one of them is we monitor gorillas when they go into people's gardens and eat their banana plants. We teach the park staff and gorilla guardians to collect fecal samples from them. And we test them for them at our Gorilla Health and Community Conservation Center, where we also look at diseases in the people and the livestock as well. And we've did a study on Giardia and Cryptosporidium because it was quite common in the community and many people are collecting water from unprotected sources. And we found that over time, Giardia and the gorillas reduced as the community health improved, which is something we're very pleased about. We do a lot of behavior change communication, and these are brochures I developed in my last year working as the first vet for the Wildlife Authority, preventing disease between people and gorillas. We train community health workers to do conservation work, and we call them village health and conservation teams. And Hope is giving a presentation in her community about how we can prevent disease and why it's important to have the children you can manage so that you don't have to always be struggling to go into the forest to collect firewood because you have too many mouths to feed. And we developed this population health environment flip chart, which has the good family and the bad family, which seems to really work. No one wants to be the bad family that is poor, struggling, can't feed their children, have teenage pregnancies. So the community is really changing because of this behavior change flip chart. They also give injections through a partnership with Family Health International. They give injections to people in their homes, the comfort of their home. And this has really helped to enable women to not have to have babies every year, and they're able to do something else with their lives. And they're much happier. Their well-being in their families has improved. And we've sustained them with group livestock projects, which is something that we're very happy about because most community health workers drop out, but ours didn't because they had an incentive. So some of the impact of our work is that gorillas are better protected on community land. The hand washing stations have gone up 7 times. The family planning started when it was less than the national average, and now it's higher than the national average, which we're very pleased about. And men are more involved in family planning and healthcare, and women are more involved in conservation, which is something we're really pleased about. So the mountain gorilla population, I participated in the first census of Bwindi in 1997. It's steadily gone up, and so has the population of the Virunga gorillas. And so in 2018, IUCN removed gorillas from critically endangered to endangered because of the positive growth trend. Even if there's just over 1,000 left in the whole world, they've almost doubled in the past 25 years. And in other parts of Africa, the gorillas may even be more, but their populations are drastically decreasing, and they're still critically endangered. We've been teaming up with health and conservation groups to promote population health and environment, which is community-based family planning around protected areas and wildlife-rich habitats. And that's something that we feel is very important for biodiversity. We've established this approach in a Savannah Park as well, Queen Elizabeth National Park, where people were poisoning lions that were eating their cows. And when we improve the health of their livestock, they're less likely to poison lions, and we carry out disease investigations between buffalo and livestock and people to prevent diseases like brucellosis, tuberculosis, foot and mouth disease. And over there you can see that's the Duke of Edinburgh. We set up a telecenter The British High Commission funded us to set up a telecentre, which my husband led that initiative, and he was giving a presentation to the Duke of Edinburgh, who sent the first email, signed Philip. Those same communities had anthrax, which came from hippos, and people were eating hippos and dying of anthrax and getting sick. And so we got together village health and conservation teams, community conservation, animal health workers, and trained them, and they stopped eating the hippos and were able to prevent further disease spread. And we're continuing to advocate for this One Health approach. This is our Gorilla Health and Community Conservation Center in Bwindi, also as far as the Virungas, where the situation is even worse than Uganda. People are much poorer. There are much more temporary houses. And even if they're largely Catholic, a lot of them really want family planning to reduce poverty in their home, which is great. So improving healthcare and responsible tourism is something that we're really focusing on a lot now at Conservation Through Public Health. And for those of you who have a chance to visit, this is what you'll be told, that you have to keep 7-meter distance. It's now increased to 10 meters since COVID began. But research that we conducted with students from UK and US found that the gorillas and people were always going closer than 7 meters, in fact, closer than 3 meters. 60% is the tourists who broke the rules, 40% of the time it was the gorillas. And so we had to find a way to prevent this disease spread. And when COVID began, of course, we were very concerned that the gorillas would get sick. You know, you all know the distance of which you can easily pass a respiratory disease to someone else, especially COVID. So in March 2020, we advocated to the Wildlife Authority to get everyone to start wearing masks, and that was successful. And then they also increased the distance from 7 to 10 meters. So now it's the new norm. Whenever you visit the gorillas and the chimpanzees, everyone has to wear masks. Knowing that the gorillas don't know there's COVID, so they still go into the communities, we started training the communities again and added COVID onto what we trained them. And we'd been teaching them about good hygiene and sanitation, referring people who have scabies, TB, HIV, and promoting voluntary family planning, sustainable agriculture, nutrition, reporting homes visited by gorillas, but also telling people how they can benefit from ecotourism. So we just added COVID onto that whole list of things that they educate people about. And we found that many people adopted hand washing stations during the pandemic, which is great. And they all really started to wear masks. That we were allowed to operate all through COVID. We've not really rested. We've worked harder than ever during the COVID pandemic. We joined the Ministry of Health COVID-19 task force together with the Wildlife Authority, and we've been helping the country in determining the COVID response, especially as it relates to conservation. And so, for example, when they opened up, the parks were closed during COVID, and then when they reopened to get the economy going a bit, because poaching was so high, the president of Uganda himself said, we don't want to make the chimpanzees and the gorillas sick, so we're going to delay to open up because we don't want to make our cousins sick, which is very good. I heard him saying it on TV, so I recorded that segment. And I was very glad that our advocacy efforts are really paying off. We worked with Right for a Woman, who helped to make masks for the rangers and everybody else. They were the lucky few who were not laid off, who didn't have any job in the pandemic when all the other places that hire people from the community were not able to employ them because there was no tourism. And we worked closely with coffee farmers around the park, and we found that they were not getting a steady market or a fair price. And even as I was trekking gorillas, I would meet the coffee farmers, like this lady, and they even tell the tourists, this is a Arabica tree, this is a Robusta tree, it's part of the trek to the gorillas. But the Entebbe Duty Free, where I'm standing over there, used to place weekly orders before the pandemic. Then when the pandemic began, they stopped placing orders. And so we had to reach outside Uganda to look for buyers, and luckily we found Mani Robbins, and Vicky's here today. She's come here for the award ceremony, and she's the one in the photo. And Mani Robbins became our first distributor in the UK, which was fantastic. And we also got some more in US and other countries. And this has helped the coffee farmers to have an income even during the pandemic. But sadly, this gorilla Rafiki was killed by a hungry bushmeat poacher who was hunting Daika and bush pig. and the group broke up. And so when we went to visit them that time, they were now being headed by a blackback, Ramutwe, because the group had broken up. There was no silverback in the group. But luckily, the situation has improved, and now they've started to stabilize. But that porter was wearing a mask saying, "In memory of Rafiki." Most of the community members were very upset that the bushmeat poacher killed the gorilla because they know what gorilla tourism has done for them. And this porter hadn't had work for 6 months until I asked him to carry my bag. So we decided that we needed to provide fast-growing seedlings for people like the bushmeat poacher. He was given 11 years in jail, which is the longest anyone has ever been jailed for killing wildlife in Uganda. But his wife, he had a wife who was 22 years old with 3 children under the age of 3. And as long as you have people like that around the park, poaching can't stop. So we got together with other groups and provided fast-growing seedlings to the most vulnerable communities, and we're still wanting to reach more. And this reduced poaching, because they told us they're poaching because they're hungry, as we distributed questionnaires. Well, as we speak now, COVID has jumped, not only to gorillas, but to other species. But luckily, it's been gorillas in zoos and not gorillas in the wild. And it's even jumped to mink and jumped back from mink to people. And so COVID has continued to be a big issue. And it's also even gone to deers in the wild. And so we are still very much on the lookout when tourists, as the economy starts opening up and tourists come back, we're really, really reinforcing these guidelines. And the Ministry of Health asked us to set up village COVID task force committees where we're working. So we set it up in 8 parishes around the park with 59 villages. And we're able to get on these task force committees. We have the rangers, we have the porters who carry tourist luggage to the gorillas, on top of the health workers and the village health and conservation teams, church, religious leaders, women groups. And this is very important because they're able to tell who has COVID, whether gorillas go to their gardens, how to isolate them and their families so that they don't spread it amongst themselves or spread it to the wildlife. This particular gorilla, this photo was actually sent to me by my team yesterday. Guess what he's doing? You just see him over there. He's raiding crops. He's raiding somebody's garden, which he shouldn't be doing. But he's the blackback from Nkuringo Gorilla Group, Tabu. He's called Tabu, which actually in our language means trouble. And so as long as the gorillas are continuing to do that, we have to make sure that they're protected from COVID in the communities, COVID from tourists. And this is an issue which keeps going on. And so the next problem we have in Bwindi is, yes, the numbers are going up, but is there enough space for the numbers to accommodate the gorillas? We've reached the carrying capacity. So our next big fundraising drive is to convince people to sell their land, of which many of them are willing to, because the land that they have is always disrupted by wildlife. And then once they're able to sell their land, then we'll be able to expand the habitat for the gorillas. Otherwise, they don't have a future still, because about half of them are in the situation of Tabu. They're always finding themselves in community land because it used to be part of their land. And this is something that we're really focusing on now as conservation through public health. I'll end off by talking about this policy brief that we have developed. We teamed up together with International Gorilla Conservation Program and the Africa CSO Biodiversity Alliance, which was developed during the pandemic to strengthen the African voice in the Convention of Biological Diversity. So this policy brief is about responsible tourism to the great apes. I co-authored it with Alice from IGCP. There are 21 countries in Africa with great apes, of which 13 have great ape tourism. And one thing that we found is that because people had to wear masks during the pandemic, in Rwanda, for example, they've had less respiratory diseases. And so a lot of people keep asking us, will mask wearing continue after the pandemic ends? Yes, it will. And that's something we're really advocating for to the governments, to the donors, to the tour operators. So by the time their tourists come, they don't expect to get a selfie with a gorilla or to get close to the gorilla. They have to become part of the solution for responsible tourism, which is good. Actually, during the pandemic, some have even said, we don't want to make the gorillas sick. We'll only come back if we're sure they'll be protected. So we're continuing to spread that message all over. I was really honored to win the 2021 UNEP Champion of the Earth Award. And one message that kept coming that I really put across was that local communities and local people from the countries where the wildlife is really need to become leaders in conservation, because they become the future members of parliament who decide whether or not you cut trees to plant sugarcane. And we really need to keep engaging them. So I am a founder member of the African Primatological Society, and I'm vice president of it. The president is from Ivory Coast, Dr. Inza Kone, and we're really advocating for African leadership in primate research and conservation across the continent. I'm also on the Women for the Environment Leadership Council, which is trying to promote more and more women leaders in conservation, of which there are very few, actually. There is an increased number of women in conservation, but very few women leaders. And if that doesn't change, then things won't really change as far as addressing conservation and climate change. And now I'm writing a book about my conservation journey, and the cover has been produced. It's coming out in October. I hope you all buy it. And, and it's talking about some of the things I've said today, the conservation journey as a woman and an African scientist in conservation. And the foreword has been written by Dr. Jane Goodall, which is something I'm very excited about. I think Anthony Collins is here. He told me he was coming. Hi, Anthony. Anthony really helped to get that going, and we hope that I've been so inspired by Dr. Jane Goodall and Professor Wangari Maathai, because conservation is a field that has very, very few women. So do other fields, but conservation particularly, and the wildlife veterinary field even more so. So they've really inspired us to go out there and make a difference in conservation. And I'm so humbled and proud that I'm being recognized for the Edinburgh Medal, which they received a number of years ago. And I want to say a big thank you to my team. This was 10 years ago, and our team has continued to develop. That baby, actually now that's his younger brother, but and my children have been coming with me since they were a few months old to the national park, and they're very good conservationists and administrators, I have to say as well. So thank you so much, the Lord Provost and the Edinburgh Science Festival, for this very important award. My mom sends her greetings. She'd have wanted to come, but she's 92 and not very mobile. But she did help in, editing my speech, and we really want to thank you so much for all the great support and encourage you to come and visit the gorillas in Uganda. And for more information, visit our website, buy some gorilla conservation coffee, and follow us on social media, sign up for our e-newsletter, and can donate through our website, and come and visit us. Thank you so much.
I now have the very pleasant task of thanking Gladys for her excellent speech and for her presence here tonight accepting the Edinburgh Medal. Thank you, Gladys. Listening to you, I was so impressed by the depth and breadth of all of that you've achieved so far. You have incredible energy and such clarity of thought that everything you've done has been a stepping stone to the next thing that you've done. You've just built and built and built and have this impressive platform now to do more, and you clearly intend to do more. I'm sure that we're only halfway through this story, and that you will be back influencing our lives, influencing people beyond this room, beyond this town, in years to come. It's clear that you are on a journey, and that I'm very privileged to share just a tiny part of it. Thank you for everything that you've done. I'm also amazed that you just seem to take on huge challenges again and again and again. And I know that these really are huge challenges. As a girl, you came to Scotland to school. That must have been more of a challenge than you let on when you said you had some fond memories. But I know from my own children raised in the tropics, coming to Scotland at all is quite terrifying, the 30-degree temperature drop, let alone anything else. You pursued your goals as a young woman. You just knew what you wanted to do and you did it. And that is not easy from anybody, for anyone. But to do it as a young woman growing up in those difficult years through Uganda's politics, being so closely involved with that, I really admire your single-mindedness, that you did what you did and with such clarity. And now you've built what is really quite an incredible new approach. You went out as a scientist, you saw a problem, you did your own research, you came to your own conclusions, and you saw what needed that things needed a new approach, that conservation needed a new approach, and the people living with conservation needed a new approach. And you've built something really quite incredibly innovative. What you've done through conservation, through public health, is becoming a model. I can see that. And I have myself experience of working in gorilla conservation in Africa. I've worked in Gabon on the other side, on the west coast, where populations are smaller, human populations are smaller, and ape populations are larger. And our conservation difficulties are nothing like as acute as what Gladys has been addressing in Uganda, where populations of the two great apes, the humans and the gorillas, and the chimpanzees, 3 great apes, are so much closer together and in so much more competition for space and for resources. And I know what challenges these are. I know that these are huge and difficult every day, and they're complex, and you have to think on your feet. And Gladys is clearly doing that because she's got a reaction to COVID that's appropriate, that's new, and she's moving with the times to keep conservation at the cutting edge, keep the development challenges in her mind, and keep things the best they can be. I'm just very, very glad you're here and very glad that you accepted the medal. And I think the only thing left to me is to unite us all in saying thank you to Gladys for accepting this medal. And I think your name is absolutely appropriate on that erstwhile list outside the door. If anyone cares to look at previous medal winners, I'm sure that you, like they, will go on to greater things. Thank you very much.